Okay, so here's what happens every single time we close a case file on this show.
Here we go.
We drop the documentary, we think, great, mystery solved, everybody's happy. And then the inbox turns into its own crime scene.
Laughs, it really does.
Welcome back to Bible X-Files. I'm Tom.
And I'm Roxanne. And if you were with us last episode, you know we spent the better part of an hour building the historical case for the resurrection of Jesus Christ, the timeline, the records, the aftershock it sent through the first century.
And the second that episode went live, you all came for us. In the best way.
In the best way. Historical pushback, theological curveballs, a few wait. But what about questions we honestly did not see coming?
So instead of letting all of that sit unanswered in a comment thread somewhere, we figured, let's reopen the file. Pull the best 15 questions you sent us, lay them out on the table, and go through them one by one. No dodging, no fluff.
3 sections tonight. The historical evidence, the theological mechanics, and the one people always skip ahead to, what this actually means for you on an ordinary Tuesday morning.
Roxanne, you've got the ledger. Question 1, hit us.
All right, back to the scene of the crime. Question 1, was the tomb actually empty, or is that a legend that got bolted on decades later?
This is the foundation, honestly. If this one collapses, everything else does too. And here's the interesting part. Even scholars who flat out reject the resurrection still concede 2 things. 1, Jesus was buried by a real named figure, Joseph of Arimathea. 2, the tomb was found empty, and it was a group of women who found it. Why does that matter? Because the earliest creed we have, recorded in 1 Corinthians 15, traces back to within a few years, some scholars argue months, of the crucifixion. That's not enough runway for a legend to grow. Not while eyewitnesses and frankly hostile authorities could just walk down the street and point at an occupied tomb.
Which is exactly why Theory 2 exists. Question 2, what about the stolen body or wrong tomb theories?
The ancient cover-up story. Matthew's gospel actually records this directly. The religious leaders paid the Roman guards to say the disciples snuck in and stole the body while they slept. But walk through the logistics with me for a second. A Roman soldier sleeping on duty was a capital offense. That's not a story you invent to protect your career. A handful of terrified disciples who scattered and hid are not overpowering a trained Roman guard unit. And if the authorities actually had the body, the fastest way to kill this movement in its crib was to produce it. Publicly. They never did, which, as any investigator will tell you, is its own kind of evidence.
Okay, but that raises the next obvious objection. Question 3, couldn't the appearances afterward just be grief hallucinations? People see what they want to see.
It's the go-to psychological explanation, and I get the appeal. But it falls apart under its own weight pretty fast. Hallucinations are private, that's kind of the defining feature. You don't get a group hallucination where multiple people simultaneously see, touch, and this is the detail people forget, eat breakfast with the same person over a 40-day span, at one point in front of more than 500 witnesses at once. According to Paul's account in 1 Corinthians 15, that's not a symptom, that's a crowd.
Question 4, and this one's interesting. Why do the gospel accounts have small variations? Different details on who got to the tomb first, how many angels were there. Doesn't that hurt reliability?
You'd think so right up until you talk to anyone who's worked a courtroom. If 4 independent witnesses give you word-for-word identical statements, that's not reliability, that's a red flag. That's collusion, a rehearsed script. Minor variation is actually the fingerprint of real, independent testimony. Different people catching a chaotic event from different angles, reporting what they personally saw.
Which leads right into one of my favorite pieces of evidence in this whole case. Question 5. Why were women the primary witnesses when female testimony basically didn't count in a first-century courtroom?
This one gets me every time. In that culture, a woman's testimony carried close to 0 legal weight. So if you're sitting in a back room fabricating a religious movement, inventing your foundational story from scratch, you do not choose women as your star witnesses. You invent male elders, respected leaders, anybody but the demographic your society already dismisses. The fact that the earliest accounts leave the women in as the first witnesses tells you something. Whoever wrote this cared more about what actually happened than about what would play well.
So 5 questions in, and the historical case is holding, which means it's time to leave the crime scene and step into the harder territory, the text itself.
Question 6, and this one confuses a lot of people. Was Jesus raised as a spirit or a real physical body?
Yeah, this gets muddled because of how Paul phrases it. Spiritual body sounds like it's implying some kind of ghost or energy form.
Right, but that's not what's happening in the text at all. Jesus goes out of his way repeatedly to prove he's physical. Touch me and see, a ghost doesn't have flesh and bones like you see I have. He eats fish in front of the disciples. He tells Thomas to put his actual fingers into the wound marks. This isn't a symbolic appearance. It's a transformed body, but a body, tangible, physical, walking around eating breakfast.
Question 7, the math one people love to argue about. Jesus dies Friday afternoon, rises Sunday morning. How is that 3 days and 3 nights?
Laughs the stickler question. Every time. But this is where you have to remember you're reading ancient Near Eastern idiom, not a Western digital clock. In that culture, any partial day counted as a full day in the count. Friday's day 1, Saturday's day 2, Sunday's day 3. Every first-century listener would have understood that instantly. It only trips up people applying 21st-century math to a first-century phrase.
Question 8, and this one's genuinely strange if you've never run into it. Where was Jesus between his death and resurrection?
This comes from a notoriously tricky line in 1 Peter 3 about Christ making a proclamation to spirits in prison. Now, we're not going to pretend that's a simple verse, because it isn't, and scholars debate the specifics. But the historical mainstream reading is that Christ was proclaiming his victory over fallen spiritual powers, announcing triumph in the realm of the dead before his physical resurrection Sunday morning.
Question 9, one of my favorites. Why does Jesus tell Mary Magdalene not to touch him, and then later tells Thomas to go ahead and touch his wounds? That feels contradictory on the surface.
It looks that way in English, but the original Greek in John 20 gives it away. The phrasing implies stop clinging, not don't touch. Mary's trying to hold onto him like life is just going back to normal, exactly like before the crucifixion. Jesus is gently telling her, no, something has shifted, this wasn't a return to the old normal, the ascension is coming. By the time Thomas shows up, it's a completely different moment, an invitation to verify what's real for the sake of Thomas's faith.
And to close out this section, question 10. If the resurrection is this central, where does the Old Testament actually predict it before the fact?
People jump straight to the suffering servant in Isaiah 53, and that's fair, but look at Psalm 16. 10, David writes, "You will not abandon my soul to Sheol or let your Holy One see corruption." Peter actually preaches on this exact verse in Acts 2, and he makes the logical case directly. David died, David's body decayed, so David wasn't writing about himself. He had to be pointing forward to a descendant whose body would not decay. That's the clue hiding in plain sight for 1,000 years before anyone understood what it meant.
All right, 10 down. History held up, the text holds up. So now the real question, so what?
Question 11. Why is the resurrection the actual linchpin? Why does everything hinge on this one event specifically?
Paul doesn't soften this at all, by the way. He says it point blank in 1 Corinthians 15. If Christ wasn't raised, your faith is empty. You're still in your sins.
And that's deliberate. You could strip away plenty of secondary doctrine and still have, I don't know, an interesting historical movement with some good ethics attached. But without the resurrection, that's all it is. It rises or falls on that one empty tomb.
Question 12. How does the resurrection actually validate Jesus' claim to be God? Because, people claim wild things all the time.
Exactly, anybody can say, I'm one with the Father, I forgive sins, I existed before Abraham. Talk is cheap. Conmen say things like that. So do people who genuinely believe delusions. What separates Jesus is he predicted his own execution and his own bodily return specifically. And then it happened publicly in front of witnesses who could be cross-examined. That's not a claim anymore. That's a verified prediction.
Question 13, and this one gets personal fast. What does Christ's resurrection actually mean for our future, our own death?
This is where it stops being abstract history and starts being, personal. Paul calls Christ the firstfruits of everyone who's died. And that's not just poetic language. In an agricultural society, firstfruits weren't a random early harvest. They were the guarantee the rest of the crop was already on its way. So Christ's resurrection isn't just his story. It's presented as the prototype, the preview. Physical death isn't presented as the final period at the end of the sentence.
Question 14. How is any of this supposed to change how someone actually lives on a normal, boring Tuesday?
It shifts your baseline posture, honestly. If the absolute worst thing that can happen to a person, death, has already been defeated decisively by someone who loves you, then everything smaller than that, your anxiety, your failures, your bad week at work, whatever's broken in your relationships, gets reframed. You're not white-knuckling through a meaningless universe. You're living inside a story that's already being restored.
And our last one, question 15. How do you actually bring this up with a skeptical friend or family member without it turning into a fight?
I love ending on this one. The mistake people make is treating it like a courtroom cross-examination, like your job is to win, to dismantle the other person's position piece by piece. Don't do that. Start with a genuinely curious question instead. Something like, hey, if it turned out the historical evidence for the empty tomb was actually rock solid, what would that mean for you? That one question does more work than an hour of arguing, because it turns an academic debate into a personal invitation.
15 questions. Deep roots and honestly, zero shortcuts taken tonight.
But here's the thing about this case file, and every case file on this show, if we're honest, we didn't actually get through all of it.
We didn't.
We got through the 15 you sent us. But there's one question that came up more than any other in the comments, and we're genuinely still building the file on it. What actually happened to the disciples afterward? Every single one of them ends up dead, executed, for refusing to recant an eyewitness account. People die for things they believe are true all the time. Almost nobody dies for something they personally know is a lie.
Which sounds like the start of episode 9.
Laughs it might just be.
So here's what we need from you. If you've got a question we didn't cover tonight, historical, theological, doesn't matter how sharp the angle is, drop it in the comments. We read every single one, and the best ones become the next case file.
And if this episode actually helped you talk through this with someone in your life, do us a favor, send it to them directly. Don't just like it and scroll past. That's genuinely how this show grows, one shared file at a time.
Bible X-Files will be back. The file's never really closed.
Thanks for digging with us tonight. We'll see you on the next drop.